just as we did this morning, because we're making arrangements to change some of the jury rooms in anticipation of deliberations, and so that takes planning and it takes time, and so that's part of what we're dealing with. So, all right, are you ready for the jury, the people?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, let's bring the jury in, please.
Judge, in light of what the court just said, I am still concerned about getting Dr. Gurr out of here by the close of business today. So I don't know, can we take a shorter lunch or?
We'll take an hour, but part of this depends on you and part of it depends on Dr. Gurr as well, depending on how the questions are answered. So. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury is back in the courtroom. Dr. Gurr, I remind you that you're still under oath. Mr. King, you may proceed with your redirect examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Gurr, forgive me for jumping around a little bit here. This morning, you were asked some questions that came from the Dr. Reed's videotaped examination of Mr. Holmes, and you reviewed that entire videotaped examination, or have you not?
Yes, I did.
And counsel asked you a question about indifference, that Mr. Holmes said to Dr. Reed that he was indifferent about what happened in the theater. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Do you recall in the video that it's actually Dr. Reed who says indifferent, that Mr. Holmes says impersonal, the same as he said to you and to Dr. Metzner, but then Dr. Reed says, no, I think it's indifferent instead, and suggests that to Mr. Holmes. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Ma'am, can I please have a video clip um, 2830, our number?
Why don't you two confer for a minute? All right, you may proceed.
A little earlier in our talk this morning, I used the word indifferent in place of impersonal once or twice. And I think you moved that into irrelevant. I'm not sure quite the context we were talking. Can you draw any distinction, or are they the same, between it's impersonal versus it's indifferent?
They're pretty similar.
Did you hear at the end where he said they're pretty similar to me?
Yes.
Let me ask you, in general, is it a potentially problematic for a psychiatrist to suggest answers to someone that they're interviewing in the course of an examination? Or is it preferable to ask questions and get the language and the words that the person is, the content of the person's own communications?
The second.
And why is that?
A more accurate presentation of a person's perceptions and experiences is provided when they detail it and provide the information directly than words or information is provided to them and they have to say, to comment on it or agree or disagree. It's just common practice. You get significantly more valuable information when you ask the question, even if you have to wait and try in different ways for the person to describe their experiences rather than put words in, give them a word when they're not talking. And it's especially difficult with Mr. Holmes because he wasn't talking much. He had to sit and wait and ask the same question repeatedly.
Is there a danger or not in suggesting responses to the person and then placing significance on whether or not the person accepting the suggestion? Is that a potential problem?
Yes.
When you watched the videotape of Dr. Reed's examination, did you notice whether or not there appeared to be numerous times that he suggested answers to Mr. Holmes?
Yes.
You were asked about hatred of people and Dr. Reed asking Mr. Holmes about hatred. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Ma'am, may I have video clip 2822, please? I guess we have a problem with freezing.
Were there people over the last few months or so leading up to July 20th of 2012, people that you told you were angry?
Oh no, I never told anybody I was angry.
Okay. folks that you told, or who at least got the impression, that in some ways you had a hatred of mankind, or were angry at mankind?
I wrote hatred of mankind in the notebook.
Okay. To you, does that translate to very angry, or is that different from very angry?
To me, the hatred's kind of like hating broccoli or something. Not a fiery, angry, passionate hate.
Okay.
It's kind of an aversive hate.
Okay. Like hating broccoli versus a fiery, passionate hate. Tell me about the hating broccoli kind of hate of mankind.
Well, I just don't want to eat broccoli, so I kind of avoid it, be averse to it. Instead of being like angry at broccoli and like chopping it up or something.
Ma'am, is that inconsistent or consistent with how he described to you his feelings towards other people in general?
It's consistent with regard to feeling aversive and feeling frightened from people, and he used the word when we were exploring anger. We did not talk about broccoli.
Okay.
Didn't come up.
And that brings up an important point. When you're analyzing different statements made by a patient, is what's important the exact quotation, the exact words that they use the exact words every time they talk about a similar topic? Or is the content of what they're conveying the more important aspect?
The consistency of the content that can be expressed in different words depending on the time of the interview and the status of the patient.
Were there any inconsistencies that you thought meant that Mr. Holmes was malingering his mental illness or faking his mental illness?
No.
Is there anything about what Mr. Holmes said or any of the testing or any of the information that you have that make you think that Mr. Holmes is being manipulative or deceitful in the way he presents the events that took place in surrounding this case?
No.
Is that consistent from your review with the opinions of every other doctor, psychiatrist, and psychologist that has examined Mr. Holmes through the pendency of this case?
Yes.
Are you aware of anyone who has suggested in any way that Mr. Holmes is faking, malingering, or is not being forthright about what happened or what was going on?
No.
You were asked about whether Mr. Holmes said that to Dr. Reed that what he did was selfish. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
Ma'am, can I please have clip 2843?
The magnitude matters. Given that magnitude and the number of other lives affected, not just the folks in the theater, would you still hold to the idea that you're not a runner?
I would say that was selfish, not morally wrong.
someone had, in an effort to kill you, cut off your leg so that you're not dead in a peaceful, dreamless sleep. You're alive with no leg and it hurts. Has that person wronged you?
Yes. Because I'm not whole anymore.
Is that person a wronger?
No, not necessarily.
Under what circumstances might he not be a wronger? Having cut off your leg in an effort to kill you.
He had to do it.
He had to do it too.
If he had to cut off my leg for some reason or another. Or else there were other consequences to not doing it.
What if he was simply trying to kill you and didn't succeed? And he was trying to kill you in order to get a point for himself?
What do you mean by a point?
The same kind of points that you made.
Value?
Yes.
Maybe you wouldn't be wrong.
You would not be wrong. Okay. What do you think you, the victim in this scenario, would do or feel with regard to the person that tried to kill you and you lost a leg?
Probably want vengeance.
Probably what?
Want vengeance.
Does the fact that, did you hear that, do you recall that part of the video?
It was, I'm sorry, but it was very difficult with the background noise for me to understand the questions. So it's hard for me to comment
Do you
on
remember?
responses.
I apologize for talking over you. Do you remember that a portion of the video with Dr. Reed where Mr. Holmes says that he thought what he did was selfish but not morally wrong? Do you recall that?
I recall seeing that before when I was reviewing the tapes, but I could not hear the words right now. I'm sorry.
Okay. And Dr. Reed's interview was after 2 years of medication, or no?
After 2 years in jail, yeah.
After having spoke to numerous mental health professionals?
Yes.
Now, if something is selfish, does that mean it's not delusional?
No.
Can you explain that?
Delusions commonly are in reference to self. The person that holds the delusion, the false beliefs, they have personal meaning to that person, to that self. So it's almost, you can say, is a delusional, that a delusion, a system, it's not just a thought, it's a system, an elaborate system that the person is engulfed in. Is it in reference to self? Yes. So it's selfish. It's self-related.
Is that common in delusions?
Yes.
Does that mean that Mr. Holmes wasn't psychotic or mentally ill?
No.
Does that affect your opinions in any way?
No.
You were asked by Mr. Broccoli this morning whether Mr. Holmes said that he did what he did for a noble purpose. If it was not for a noble purpose, does that mean it's somehow not delusional?
No.
Does whether or not there's a noble purpose or not tell us anything about the way Mr. Holmes's mind was working, or whether he was consumed by psychotic delusions or not?
No.
Does it change your opinions at all in this case?
No.
Can sometimes, you were asked about the unmedicated and untreated schizophrenic people. Does the fact that there are unmedicated and untreated schizophrenics out there who don't commit murder mean that Mr. Holmes was not mentally ill or was not psychotic with schizophrenia at the time he committed the murder?
No.
Can you explain that?
As I said before, a large number of people with schizophrenia takes time, takes several years until the presentation of the illness. On average, 2 to 3 years. When a person presents for clinical care or brought in by family for clinical care, you go back in a detailed history, you commonly notice a deterioration or a process that has been taking place for several years. So people can be unmedicated and psychotic before diagnosed. The medication is given by a physician. So until they come to a physician, a long period of time can elapse, and it can be years. In addition to that, when people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia and the proper treatment that may include medication is indicated, many people with schizophrenia, when they get a little bit better, take themselves off the medication. Sometimes they report it. Most commonly, they do not report it. People with schizophrenia, a good portion of them, do not adhere to treatment. They believe that they will be okay, and they do not like the treatment, sometimes the side effects of the treatment. And the analogy that I'm thinking about, that I believe you asked me, is that does it mean the fact that he was not medicated, that he doesn't have schizophrenia or committed the act, does it rule out schizophrenia, or that it was not manifested? Is that the analogy that I'm thinking about is that when you have a faulty car, faulty ignition, and can affect millions of cars, but unfortunately only few at the specific circumstances of the speed that it might be associated with the driving or the terrain will result in a disaster. Few will be dead as a result of that from the faulty ignition. But it does not mean that when this occurred, it is not related to the faulty ignition. Not every faulty ignition results in that. So fortunately, only a minority of people who have schizophrenia commit this type of act and crime. The majority do not.
And is it or is it not true that people with higher intelligence tend to have more bizarre delusions than others who are not so intelligent? And might that affect how this case unfolded?
This is correct. It can take longer to present, for them to reveal symptoms. Denial of illness is extremely common in schizophrenia. People are not born with an S on their forehead, and it is difficult for them to accept and admit that they are different and that they have a serious mental illness. Extremely difficult.
And in your opinion, was that difficult for Mr. Holmes?
It was very difficult for Mr. Holmes. He went through years of trying to distract himself from the thoughts that initially, not on a daily basis, but later on frequently, will go through his head of kill yourself and then kill others. It was a process, and he worked at it and tried to find ways of putting the thoughts down, putting them away. And we all do. When we sometimes have unpleasant thoughts, not related to suicide or homicide, but that we don't like, it's a natural reaction. And when these thoughts are so severe and extreme to a young person, why do they come? What's wrong with me? Extremely overwhelming. And he did not disclose it to anybody until, to a professional, until he presented in student health, verbalizing that he thinks about killing others. So we're talking about years of him trying to deal with it by himself until he could no more. In graduate school, went to look for help with the hope or belief that the psychiatrist who saw him will be able to fix it.
And that was going to be my next question is it significant then, psychiatrically in your opinion or not, that despite that, Mr. Holmes voluntarily went to a psychiatrist and told them he was having thoughts of killing lots of people?
It is significant, it's unusual, and part of it I attribute to his high level of intellectual functioning. The sufficient insight that he had and the length of the process, it didn't happen overnight. The years that he was struggling with it to realize I am different than all the other kids that I encounter in high school. This is when the pre-morbid phase began to emerge, realizing I'm not the same. There's something different about me.
Now, are there, despite the reticence that you're talking about to accept your own mental illness or one's own mental illness and accept treatment for that, are there those, like Mr. Holmes, for example, that do in fact seek out treatment and take the medication that they're given? And is that what he did?
Yes.
And is that what he does to this day? Do you know whether or not he's compliant in taking his antipsychotic medications?
He's compliant, and he reported, and it's in my record, I believe, that the medications have been helpful to him, and he wished to have had them before, that the antipsychotic medications are helpful to him.
Can delusions be distasteful to those of us, to healthy people? Might they appear distasteful? Or can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, I mean, delusions are, when a person who does not experience the delusions and does not know a person who is going through that, listens to it, establish trust with a client or a patient and listens to it, it's overwhelming to listen to it and see how it can encompass and take over a person's life. For me, after listening to so many of it, it's part of my profession. But for other people, including family members who are not familiar, when we disclose it, they are shattered by it. They can't believe that their child was living with them and they had no knowledge or appreciation of what they are going through.
Okay. Did Mr. Holmes choose the delusions that he suffers from?
No.
Now, you just talked about him struggling with this for many years. In your opinion, did he find the delusions distasteful?
Yes. He made every effort not to have the thoughts that were intruding into his mind, his brain. Yes, he made every effort. And I think I mentioned that by some of his activities, plucking his hair that he found helpful. Yes.
And in this struggle over many years, did he win for a long time? Was he able to suppress these delusions?
He was.
In the end, did the mission overcome the desire to get well?
Yes.
In your opinion, is that or is that not part of the psychotic process?
It is part and parcel of the psychotic process.
Now, you were asked some questions by Mr. Brockler yesterday about how important it is to interview the parents of your patients. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes, read from my book.
And that was your little book, and do you recall what's the name of that book that he was quoting from?
I mean, there were two books. I'm not sure which one he was quoting for. It was commissioned by the Annenberg Foundation that was making an effort, Annenberg School of Communication at the University of Pennsylvania, making an effort to increase public awareness of mental illness. And there were different commissions for that. I was the chair of the Schizophrenia Commission. Many experts from across the United States, leading academic institutions, participated. It resulted in a big book, and then the Annenberg Foundation asked me to put a book that describes simply, the focus was on adolescents, early onset of symptoms that will be available, and we distribute it freely to parents of young people with schizophrenia, and a book that
Sustained.
I can look in my...
No, that's okay. Mr. Brocker read you a quote from that book about the importance of interviewing parents. When you wrote that, was that or was it not intended for dealing with young children who are showing signs of schizophrenia, who are living at home with their parents?
Correct. And in this case, they're brought in by their parents. I haven't seen an adolescent comes in of his or her own volition and saying, this is what I'm experiencing. It's the parents who become concerned about the behavior and come in with the child and sign the papers as well. These are minors.
Okay. And in that context, would the parents have a tremendous amount of information about their child because they live with them?
Yes.
Sustained.
Would they have a tremendous amount of information because they lived with them, or would they not?
They will. They observe them on a daily basis, going to school, during meals, during family activities, and that's the information that we obtain from them.
Now, this went on for a long time yesterday, where we talked about, your interview with the parents in this case. And let me ask you this. Did you have information before you even went to see Mr. Holmes that he was not living at home with his parents or not? Where was he living during the events that led up to the July 20th, 2012?
He was living on Perry Street, I think it's 619 Perry Street in Colorado.
And where were his parents living?
His parents were living in San Diego, California.
And did you have any information about the amount of contact that had gone on between Mr. Holmes and his parents?
Limited contact. It preferred not to communicate by telephone and to communicate by email.
Now, before you talked to Mr. Holmes, did you get a chance to tell investigators that worked for our office the questions that you would like answered by the parents? Because at that time, or not, were you able to provide questions that you wanted answers that were of significance about his childhood?
Yes.
And did you get answers to those questions through interviews that were done by those investigators?
In January, I believe it was the end of January 2013.
And you were subsequently able to interview his parents, were you or were you not?
I was.
Was that in November of 2014, or when was that?
In November, I believe 19th, 2014.
When you did interview the parents, did you find out that the information that you got directly from them was identical in nearly every respect to the information that you got from the interviews that were provided to you?
Correct.
Were they identical with the information that Dr. Metzner received from the parents when he interviewed them?
Yes.
Excuse me. Were they identical to the statements received by Dr. Reed when he interviewed the parents?
Yes.
Did the fact that you didn't personally interview Mr. Holmes's parents more early in the process have any effect on your opinions whatsoever?
No,
Does it change Mr. Holmes' mental illness or not?
it does not.
Is it irrelevant, in your expert opinion, to this jury's determination?
Yes.
Were you given, and there were some questions about information and records provided to you by the defense. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Were you provided with interviews that were done by the defense?
Yes.
Were you provided with videotapes, home videos?
Yes.
Were you provided with photographs or not?
Yes.
Were you provided with records,
Yes.
actual records that documented what happened?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to think, or not, that those were doctored, manipulated, specially selected in any kind of way?
Absolutely not.
Did you receive, through the course of this case, all of the disclosures that were made to the court-appointed experts, Dr. Metzner and Dr. Reed?
Yes.
Did they receive the identical information that you received from both sides?
Sustain a select foundation.
Did you receive the entire file from the Colorado Mental Institute Health at Pueblo that contained every piece of information that those doctors received?
Yes.
Was it consistent with the information, the same information that you received, or not?
Yes.
You were asked questions about when your report of June 17th, 2013. Do you remember there were a lot of questions about that? Your first report?
Yes.
And there were many questions about what was written in that report and what was not written in that report. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Many questions about what you had to review before that session. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Were you ever operating under the principle that you had to complete your evaluation by June 17th, 2013? Was that the end?
No.
Did you intend or not to continue to see Mr. Holmes over time?
Yes.
Was the 17th some kind of magic date?
I believe that some filing with the court needed to be done, and that I was asked by the defense team to provide a report.
Okay. If you had not had enough information, if you had not seen Mr. Holmes and obtained enough information from him, would you have rendered an opinion in the case, or would you have said, no, I'm not ready to do that yet?
I would have not rendered an opinion.
If you had not received sufficient documentation or other information, would you have refused to render an opinion at that point?
Yes.
Did you render an opinion at that point? When you rendered your opinion, did you or did you not feel that you had sufficient information that you felt confident in your, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty based upon your experience in the conclusions and the opinions that you rendered?
Yes,
Did you in fact continue to see Mr. Holmes many times after you issued that report?
correct.
Did the information that you received from Mr. Holmes subsequently, as well as the information you received from other sources subsequently, change or not change your diagnostic formulation?
Did not change.
Did it change or not change your opinions about Mr. Holmes' mental illness or the degree of it?
Did not change.
Did it change or not change your opinions in any way about whether or not Mr. Holmes had the capacity to distinguish between right or wrong from a societal moral view on July 20th, 2012?
It did not.
If you had changed your opinion or seen anything that affected your opinion or changed your opinion, would you have issued a report indicating that that was the case?
Yes,
When you issued your second report, did you indicate in that you had the same opinions and the reasons why you felt that that was reinforced by all of the information and contact you've had with Mr. Holmes since then, or was that not what you said and what you meant?
no.
No.
No, I mean, I think it was maybe a complex, is that yes, I was consistent. I did not change my opinion. Or maybe I didn't follow your question.
Maybe I asked a really bad question. It's probably the more likely. You were asked a lot of questions about when you had the notebook and when you didn't have the notebook and when you went over the notebook or didn't go over the notebook. Did you have the notebook before you wrote your report on June 17th, 2013?
I did.
When did you receive the actual notebook, a physical copy of the notebook?
On February 13, 2013.
Previous to that, in November of 2012, before you saw Mr. Holmes at all, were you able to review the notebook for about an hour but unable to take actual possession of a copy?
Correct, on November 28, 2012.
Did you begin going over the notebook in detail with him on your visit in May of 2013, and did that continue or not in your visit in August of 2013?
Correct.
Was there anything in your review of the notebook with Mr. Holmes that changed in any way your opinions about his mental illness, or did they make them even stronger?
Even stronger.
Was there anything contained in the notebook or your review of the notebook with Mr. Holmes that made you change your opinions about whether he was sane on July 20th, 2012?
No.
You were asked some questions about Mr. Holmes. Well, strike that. This morning you were asked some questions about picking and choosing information. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Mr. Brockler asked you some questions about Mr. Holmes' treatment at the Community Human Services Center, Family Services Center in Salinas, California, when he was 8 years old. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Mr. Brockler pointed out to you that one of the appointments that the Holmes family had with this counseling center, do you recall Mr. Brockler pointing out one of the visits?
Yeah.
Were there in fact only one visit?
No.
How many visits were there? Do you remember?
4.
Okay. Now, Mr. Brockler mentioned that the social worker noted that Mr. Holmes was, quote, mute and avoided eye contact, that she noted that in her notes. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Now, as it turns out, what was her name? Do you remember? Was her name John?
To-
John Adams? Was that the name of the social worker? Do you remember?
Yes.
In your experience as a psychiatrist, would it be unusual or not for an 8-year-old child brought in for treatment for the first time in their life and meeting a treatment provider to be shy about that and avoid eye contact and perhaps not talk?
Not at all.
Can you explain that briefly, please?
I want to put it, may I put it in context?
Yes, ma'am. If you could briefly, please.
I'm an adult psychiatrist. My PhD is in clinical developmental, so I've seen children as part of my training in psychology. In the past few years, since 2009-10, I've been directing a large project that deals with children from age 8 on. And I'm currently, in the past few years, I've been working with Children's Hospital, where I do see children from age 8 on. Children, and for those of us who have children, when they're brought in to an unfamiliar setting, brought in by the parents, because there are some issues or problem, many times do not talk and sit quietly, and for somebody as shy as Mr. Holmes, this is quite common.
Now, in the other visitations during that counseling session, the other 3, was Mr. Holmes reported as being, or not, as being talkative, smiling, good eye contact, increased socialization with his peers, riding bikes?
Correct.
Is there a danger in selecting a specific piece of information and taking it out of context, doctor, in light of when you're trying to make this kind of determination, this kind of diagnosis?
Yes.
Do you recall whether the final determination in that counseling was that it was Mr. Holmes' parents that needed some help with parenting in the end?
Yes, setting limits, sort of being parents.
Now let me ask you about that. Is it significant, the reason why he went to counseling, or is it significant in your expert opinion that there was something there, that there was something that his parents identified at the age of 8 that was wrong enough that they felt they needed to go to a professional?
Correct.
Now we talked about the treatment with Mel Lipsy, which was when he was in his teens. Is that right or not?
Yes.
There was a lot of talk about why he went in for treatment, whether it was due to the suicide attempt or slapping his sister or a number of different reasons. Do you recall those?
Yes.
First of all, a boy slapping his sister, is that odd or aberrant, violent behavior, in your opinion?
I mean, I don't like it to happen, having boys and a girl, but my understanding from talking to his parents was that his sister, who is 5 years younger, was in his face, following him, interfering with his functioning, with his daily activities. So at one time, he slapped her.
Is it odd for that to happen between siblings?
No.
Is there psychiatric significance to that?
No.
Now, is it important in your opinion, psychiatrically important, the reason why his parents initiated the treatment, the specific reason, whether it was the suicide attempt or not? Or is it more psychiatrically significant to you the fact that they again determined when he was in his teens that there was something wrong that needed to be identified and helped by a professional?
Correct.
Do we know whether or not he saw Mr. Lipsy several times or over a period of like a year?
Yeah, I believe there was 16 sessions, but That's what I remember at multiple sessions.
Do we know or do we not know what the content of that treatment was, or have all the records been destroyed?
We do not have the records.
You were asked some questions about graduate schools and his acceptance at graduate schools. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Now, I think that you wanted to say something about the University of Iowa during this line of questioning, and Mr. Brockler said you could say it during redirect. So I'm going to give you that opportunity. Was there anything about his application to the University of Iowa or to the University of Illinois at Urbana that you found psychiatrically significant in your opinion?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, the objection is overruled. Mr. King, you may proceed.
What psychiatric significance in your...
Oh, are you? Okay, we'll give you, can we give him a new one,
Yep.
please?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
What happened with his application at the University of Iowa that was significant to you, ma'am?
I don't have it in front of me, but what I recall when I reviewed it was a note from one of the faculty member who is part of the admissions committee saying do not admit under any circumstances. And with other commenting that is poorly interviewing and doesn't talk much and looks different.
With regard to his childhood and the suggestion that he has always been the same, do you have well, first of all, did you receive not just the information from Family Services Center, but a huge amount of information from family members, teachers, classmates, and friends from Mr. Holmes' childhood?
Yes.
And did you receive similar information from when he was in high school and in college?
Yes.
In your opinion, was he always the same in terms of the social aspect of his life, or was there a change that took place around the time they moved back to San Diego, in that he became more withdrawn.
Yes.
I'm sorry, that was a choice question. I don't think it can be answered yes. So why don't you repeat your question?
Okay. Was there a change, based upon all of the information that you got and the many, many interviews that you reviewed, was there a change that took place around the time of the move in that he became more withdrawn, or has he always been the same?
Against the background of a shy, quiet child, but fully engaged in school and in friendships in the community, there was a change after they moved to San Diego.
You were asked some questions about a class Mr. Holmes took, one class from his entire academic career, which was a class in undergraduate school called The Meaning of Life, Ethics and the Meaning of Life. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes, Philosophy 3.
And you were asked about the books that he read in that class. You don't specifically, do you specifically recall the books that you
I
read in
don't
that
recall, but I picked it up.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Are philosophical ideas often incorporated into delusions, or is that a red flag of some kind?
Can be incorporated depending on the background and intellectual background and experiences and interests of an individual.
Does that mean we just say that, rule out delusion then? If it comes from philosophy, it just can't be delusion? Is that a valid assessment?
No.
Why?
Because for people who can experience delusions of high intellectual functioning, the delusions are more complex and more philosophical in nature.
Do you have an opinion about whether that was the case in Mr. Holmes' circumstance with regard to his delusions, or whether that was not the case in Mr. Holmes' circumstance?
It was.
Does the fact that Mr. Holmes took a class when he was in college called the Ethics and Meaning of Life affect in any way his mental illness as you saw it develop in 2012?
No.
Does it change your opinions at all?
No.
Does it mean that he was sane on July 20th, 2012, in your opinion?
No.
Does it have any meaning from your clinical perspective as to the issues that are relevant in this case?
No.
You were asked about whether Mr. Holmes performed below expectations in grad school. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Now, did Mr. Holmes continue to go to class in the spring semester of 2012?
Yes.
Did he continue to turn in his homework assignments?
Yes.
Did he continue to ride his bicycle to class?
Yes.
Did he did he eventually drop out of school?
Yes, in June 2012.
May I approach the exhibit, Your Honor?
You may.
Ma'am, Ms. Huntsman, can I please have People's Exhibit PTR 1195? This is an already admitted exhibit, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. apparently it's not working.
Apparently not. I'll just move on without it.
Okay.
Did you, if I could approach the witness and
Yes.
show these to her? Do you see these documents here, which are admitted exhibits PTR 1195 and 1197?
I see the document.
Okay. Are those rotation lab work assessments from two of the labs that Mr. Holmes was involved in?
Yes,
And this one, 1196, is this also a lab assessment?
yes,
Do you recall, and if you need to look at these again to refresh your recollection, you can let me know. In the lab assessment from Sukumar Vijayaraghavan's lab, do you recall that he did fairly well on that assessment?
yes,
That it indicated that he had an adequate approach and that his data was analyzed appropriately?
yes,
Do you remember whether or not in his presentation he had slides that were organized,
yes,
that his comments added value to the slides? Do you recall that?
yes,
That he got a medium grade on responding to comments from the audience? Do you recall that?
yes,
When you looked at People's Exhibit 1196, though, which is the Mark Delacqua's lab from 2012, is there a marked decrease in performance there?
yes,
Did he get a poor grade on understanding of the assigned reading related to the project?
yes,
Did he get a poor grade on understanding of the project?
yes,
Did he get a poor grade on ability to design and interpret experiments?
yes,
Did he get a poor grade on ability to communicate in general on a day-to-day basis about the project?
yes,
Did he get a poor grade on performance in rotation presentations?
yes,
Did he get a poor grade on demonstrating enthusiasm for the project?
yes,
Do you recall in Dr. Metzner's report if I may have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Do you remember in Dr. Metzner's report the following quotations about his final prelim? Professors report that James was unable to get from A to G in a timely, organized manner in his answers. They stated that they were concerned that he might not have more than a superficial knowledge of the material, or that he simply knew the words to use without understanding the concepts. They stated that he performed poorly uniformly, not on one particular portion. Do you remember that?
yes,
In your opinion, did Mr. Holmes suffer an academic decline relative to his abilities and his other performance during the spring of 2012? Or was he the same as he had always been?
decline,
Did he get accepted into a lab or not?
no,
In his perception, from the statements you got from him, what was his perception about whether he was succeeding or failing in graduate school?
failing,
Did that achieve kind of did that have psychological or psychiatric importance in your opinion, and how so?
yes,
How so?
Going to graduate school and being a neuroscience major and becoming a neuroscientist was a major aspect of his life. It kept him going while he was already serious mentally ill. It's something that was very important for him. And his experience of the difficulty of his expectation, and yesterday I believe we spoke about it a little bit, some of it was irrational. It can be difficult at the beginning. It's a higher level of graduate school. But his experience, I'm a failure, I will not be able to accomplish it, to accomplish the goal of my life, has affected him significantly. There's nothing to live for. The sense that something is really wrong with me became more intensified, and there was no future. There's no meaning in life. It was for him a devastating experience, regardless of the fact that he didn't get an F. In graduate school, if you are not admitted to a lab rotation, sometimes you're terminated. You get the PhD through working in a laboratory. And no laboratory after the rotation admitted him to be somebody who will perform under a professor's supervision. It can be corrected, and some students correct it. He did not experience that.
I want to ask you a couple questions about his romantic involvements, and what's your opinions about the level of social performance those reflect, if I may. You were asked some questions about the fact that he sent an email to Gargi asking for her phone number initially. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you recall whether or not he actually asked her out first, though, or whether she asked him out?
She asked him out.
So he was able to send an email asking for her phone number. For a 23-year-old man with a superior intellect who's in graduate school, is that an appropriate or is he fully socially interactive in a romantic way at that point?
No.
Was he trying very, very hard to be socially interactive at that point in his life? Did he tell you about that?
Yes.
Now, you were asked about in the springtime whether he was increasingly isolated. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
And Hillary Allen was brought up. Do you remember her?
Yes.
And you were asked about the relationship, and I'm using air quotes, that he had with Ms. Allen. Do you recall that?
Yes.
What did that relationship consist of?
They went on a hike one time.
Okay. And did they send a series of text messages back and forth intermittently or not?
Yes.
Did she ever, to your knowledge, express a romantic interest in Mr. Holmes?
No.
Did they ever have a second date?
No.
Did they get together and have dinner and conversation?
No.
What's your opinion about whether or not he had a meaningful relationship, was meaningfully socially engaged with Hillary Allen?
He was not.
During that period of time, what had Mr. Holmes done in terms of his other friends, his girlfriend, for example, Gargi? She broke up with him at first. Did they get back together after that, and how did that work?
They got back together for a month, but then it was over, and he did not see a point in pursuing it. He was interested initially, he loved her, in a longer-term commitment. She was not interested in that and communicated that to him. Then talking over, they became friends for another month.
And then who terminated the relationship?
He did.
And then did he cease contacting her, or did he continue to contact her after that?
There was some, I don't I don't remember the dates of the emails, although I've reviewed it, so there was some communication through email, but it is not what I will call a romantic relationship anymore.
Did you recall in the videotape of Dr. Reed's examination, Mr. Holmes saying that not only did he cut off his ties with his friends, Ben Garcia, Tim Tatscott, Gargi Dada, but he also went as far as to delete their phone numbers from his phone. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Are there any other social interactions that you're aware of that Mr. Holmes was involved in at all?
No.
Friends? Any other friends?
No.
You were asked some questions about him being involved, socially, interactively involved by putting a profile on some porn or some sex sites or something. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
Do you know whether Mr. Holmes actually talked to anyone as the result of those sites?
He did not.
Do you know whether he actually emailed anyone as a result of those sites?
I believe he did not.
Did he ever go on any dates as a result of those sites?
No.
Is creating a profile on a sex site a appropriate social interaction that you would expect from a 23-year-old man with a superior intellect who's in grad school or not?
Sustained.
In your opinion, as a psychiatrist, was he socially engaged during that period of time by way of those websites? And do you have an opinion about that?
He was not. When evaluating social engagement in a psychiatric context, you evaluate engagement with whom, the frequency of engagement, through phone calls, through setting up outing, nature of discussion, nature of relationship. It's a much deeper level than posting on a website.
You were asked about interviewing Margaret Roth and Dr. Fenton and Dr. Feinstein. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Did you want to interview those folks?
Yes.
Did you find out that in fact they had hired lawyers and refused to talk to anybody?
That's what I was told.
Are you aware of whether or not Dr. Reed and Dr. Metzner got to talk to them?
I believe they did.
Was that because this judge ordered those doctors to talk to Dr. Reed and Dr. Metzner?
Yes. All right, the objection is sustained. Mr. King?
And I stand.
Your mic. Thank you.
And I stand corrected. That was my mistake. Was it the fact that the judge ordered them to talk to them or issued an order that indicated that privilege had been waived and that they were authorized to do that?
I'm not familiar with the legal terminology of privilege, but I knew that they had to talk. So if this is what it means.
Would you accept my representation that
The objection is sustained, and that last answer is stricken, and the jury should disregard it.
Okay.
So you should treat it as though you never heard it. All right, Mr. King.
would you agree that they weren't ordered to talk, but there was an order issued authorizing that privilege was waived to enable that to happen?
Yes.
Judge, I don't have any, now might be a good time to take a break and change the batteries, I guess.
Oh,
If
okay.
you want to do that.
All right. Members of the jury, let's go ahead and take our lunch break. Is everyone okay taking 1 hour today? Yes, and some of you are saying yes before I finish the question. So I'm going to take that to be an enthusiastic yes. We'll take 1 hour today, so let's have you back at 1:15, okay? Please make sure you abide by all my admonitions. Thank you. The record should reflect the jury has exited the courtroom. Everyone may be seated. So it's about 12:15. Let's have everybody back at 1:15. That gives us almost 2 hours. There's no reason why we can't get done with Dr. Gurr by 3 o'clock.
I have maybe 15 minutes left, Judge.
Great.
At the most.
Okay, great.
And Judge, by way of, just in terms of scheduling as well, we still have some video to show.
Right.
And we've taken a look at that, and
Right.
we don't believe that we are requesting to publish any more of the video from the police department. And if I can get the exhibit number for the court in a moment, we think we published enough for now. If the jury wants to watch more, they can certainly watch more. But we're not intending to play the rest of the 4-hour video.
Does the prosecution have a position on that?
We think about it over one show.
Yep. All right.
And
Okay.
the other thing is we may not be requesting to publish the entire 2-hour video of him in the jail as well. Those were introduced in their entirety because I didn't want to get an objection that we had edited them somehow. But I think that the either side can play whatever relevant portions they want to, and we probably will only be asking to play about 15 minutes, the first 15 minutes of that second video, rather than the entire 2-hour period.
All right. The prosecution can think about that during the lunch hour as well. All right. And then do you know yet then after Dr. Gurr who your next witness is?
We will not be calling Dr. Gray,
Okay.
but we may have to recall Dr. Mr. Gondlach very briefly, and I think that's it. But there may be another brief witness, but nothing significant, Your Honor. I think we're going to be well done before the end of the day.
Okay, great. All right, and then we'll talk at the end of the day about the prosecution and its rebuttal case, okay? All right, the court will be in recess. Thanks, everyone.